Can Utah lose 2 games in the Pac-12 regular season and still make the championship game? We're talking about it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We're available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege, and when you enter promo code LockedOnCollege, that's all caps, no spaces, Locked On College, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Once again, Locked On College. Birddogs, and the promo code is Locked On College, one word, to get in on that great offer from Birddogs. We'll hear a little bit more about our friends at Birddogs in a little bit, but my name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. On today's show, we're going to talk about the men's basketball team missing out on a transfer. Also talk about Karene Reid being named to an award watch list. But first, I want to touch on a topic that could be very interesting that plays out this fall, and that's if Utah can make the Pac-12 championship game if they do lose 2 regular season games. Because look, just based on the projections and how brutal of a schedule they're going to be playing, they're probably going to lose 2 games, if not more than that, which, look, if they were to lose 3, then they'd probably get knocked out of it. But I will come out and say really quick, like, they absolutely can lose just 2 games and still make the championship game. I'll explain why in a second, but I did my schedule predictions earlier throughout the last few episodes. Been looking at each chunk of the season in a 4-game samples, right? I had Utah 10-2 overall on the season, and I had those 2 losses in Pac-12 play. I picked at Oregon State, and I picked at Washington for those. They could easily lose some of those other games. They could easily beat both of those teams too, because the Pac-12 is going to be really good this year. So there's a lot of different ways the season and everything can play out. And if you're looking at the schedule for Utah football just in general right now, there are some really tough stretches, right? Starting out with Florida and Baylor. That doesn't affect their Pac-12 championship season, but starting out the season with 2 losses or even 1-1 can hurt you a little bit just going forward in terms of trying to keep up that mentality. Sometimes an early season loss can be good, right? Like, gets everyone to realize, man, we already lost 1, like we can't lose another, or everything we wanted is over. That can really help. Or sometimes if you lose 2, can cause things to spiral. But either way, I mean, look, UCLA and Oregon State, they're 2 really good teams. Utah has to play them in their first 2 games to open the Pac-12 regular season. Then you get a little bit of break in Cal, who is still a solid team, but Utah should be able to beat them at home. Then you take on USC and Oregon. That's about as tough of a 2-game stretch as you could have between 2 teams who are very well also not just vying for a Pac-12 championship, but the college football playoff. Then you get Washington. You close the season with Washington, Arizona, and Colorado, which Arizona and Colorado feel like 2 huge swings team to me. And then you guys, if you listen to the show, I know I'm very high on Washington this season. I think they'll be really good. And just projecting it as I had Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. I had them facing off against Washington because I do think the Huskies are ready to make the leap and make the next step. And I do think their program's in a very strong position to do so. So that brings up the question, like I mentioned, those 2 losses to Oregon State. And then also you factor in that other loss that I gave to Utah in them playing at Washington, those 2 road losses, because this 2 team lost their 2 Pac-12 regular season games on the road last year. Been pretty strong at home, but they will be tested with Oregon coming to town and UCLA coming to town this year. But the question is, can you lose 2 games in Pac-12 play and still make the championship game? And the answer to that is yes. And Utah did it last year, but last year was crazy, right? Because we had all those tiebreakers. I remember I actually had recorded, because I was unaware of some of the tiebreakers. I thought when Utah had lost to Oregon, I thought that ended their chances to go to the Pac-12 championship game. But then we learned about all these crazy tiebreakers that could happen. Still seemed unlikely. And then somehow Utah made it happen, right? When you had Washington beating Washington State, we thought that would happen, although, that's a kind of a rivalry game. The Apple Cup, things could get a little crazy there. Then you have UCLA beating Cal. That was the easiest one. And then the hardest one was going to be Oregon was going to Oregon State. And look, Oregon State, we knew they're a pesky team. They're good, but Oregon had been operating on a much higher level. They even got up huge in the game. I remember turning it off and then check my phone later and see the update. Oregon State stormed back and won without throwing a pass from the 6-minute mark in the third quarter on. Like, just unbelievable stuff. And because those 3 things happened, Utah was able to make the Pac-12 championship game despite having those 2 losses, right? So that's something for Utah that I do think you look at last season, like, hey, they got lucky a little bit with all those tiebreakers, but it hasn't always come down to crazy tiebreakers by that for Utah to get in with 2 losses. And just in general, every single season, the Pac-12 championship game, except for 2019, has had at least one, if not both teams that suffered multiple conference losses. Let's look back in the 21 championship game, right? Utah only had 1 loss in Pac-12 play. Oregon, who got in, they had 2 losses at that point. keep it going to 2019. As I mentioned, that's the year that Utah and Oregon, they both only had one loss. And this is just, once again, just looking at the history, seeing, hey, how many 2-loss teams have made Pac-12 championship game, and the numbers actually is a lot more surprising than you think. And it just feels like it's hard to make it when you have 2 losses, just because we're coming off a season in which it seems so improbable for Utah to make it with 2 losses, yet they were able to do it. And they've been able to make it with 2 losses or even more in other instances. For example, let's look at 2018. Utah had 3 losses and they made the Pac-12 championship game that season. Washington had 2 losses and they also found themselves in there. So both teams had multiple conference losses in the season and were still able to make the championship game. Then in 2017, you had Utah who made it with just 1 loss, and Stanford made it having lost 2 games in Pac-12 play. So once again, just a ton of games and teams there that featured multiple teams, 2 conference losses, or at least one team that had lost 2 games. So you can absolutely lose 2 games and still make the Pac-12 championship game. That's what it's taught us, just looking back on the recent 6 years we've seen in the conference. Even 2020, I took the COVID year out, but I think USC was undefeated. They were 5-0, but the team they played in Oregon at the time, Oregon had 2 losses. They were 3-2 entering that in that weird shortened season. So even that season, you had a team with multiple losses in the Pac-12 championship game. So it shows you it is possible. And the other thing I think that bears mentioning is Utah will not be the only Pac-12 team with 2 losses, in my opinion, because the conference is loaded with talent. Let's look at the FanDuel projected win totals. You have Oregon State at 9.5, USC with 9.5, Washington with 9.5, UCLA Bruins projected at 8.5, the Utes projected at over 8.5, and Oregon State with over 8, projected at over 8 wins too. So that is by far the most of any Power 5 conference too. I shouldn't say by far, but it is the most of any Power 5 conference with teams projected to win over 8 games. And how are these teams going to be able to win that many games overall? Well, they're going to beat up on each other a little bit too, because each team in the Pac-12 faces a gauntlet of a schedule. Some can be more difficult than others, but every single one has their challenges. For example, we already went through Utah's a little bit first, right? They have to go on the road to USC, Washington, and Oregon State, and that's not even mentioning getting Oregon and UCLA at home. So 3 really difficult road games, but they're not the only ones with difficult games, right? Oregon has to go to Washington, to Utah. Remember what happened last time? Oregon went to Utah, obviously. So that's going to be a tough game for them. They also face USC and Oregon State at home. And look, should they be able to defend home against Oregon State especially? Yeah, but they also should have been able to go in and beat Oregon State last year. And I think Oregon State could be even better this season just based on DJU coming in to solidify the quarterback spot for them. No, they lost some talented players, but I just think overall they could be an even better team this coming season. So Oregon, a tough schedule. How about Washington? They have to go to Oregon State, one of the most challenging places to play in the Pac-12. And they also have to go to the Coliseum and take on USC. And after that USC stretch, they also play Utah. That's back-to-back weeks. They play USC and Utah. Now they get to host Utah in that game, but that's not going to be an easy out. Neither is when they host Oregon. So those are 4 really challenging games there too. And then you get Oregon State as well, and Oregon State hosts Utah and Washington. So 2 tough home games. They've been good at home, but look, this Utah home winning streak that I've bragged about a lot for the Utes is going to eventually come to an end, and it could come to an end for Oregon State this season too, with 2 tough opponents in Utah and Washington. And Oregon State, they've only lost, I shouldn't say home streak, because they have lost a home game last season. They lost one against USC when the Trojans came to town, but they did not lose one in 2021. So in the last 2 seasons, they've only lost 1 home game. Utah in the last 2 seasons has lost 0 home games and hasn't lost a true game dating all the way back to 2018. But they got those 2 difficult home ones, and their road schedule where they have to travel isn't as brutal, but they still have the tough game going to Oregon. And this is an Oregon State team that, as strong as they've been at home, they have had an underwhelming loss or 2 on the road. So I think that's something that bears watching too. They could be the team that gets upset by Arizona this season. We saw Arizona upset UCLA last season, for example. So some of those teams that are projected with less than 8 wins, their big season defining win could be against a Beavers team that has been playing some really strong football, but just ends up not having that momentum that day. Things are off, offense isn't clicking, and there's a loss right there. So there is definitely going to be one team, especially this year with how good the conference is. We always talk about the conference cannibalizing itself, and usually that's with lesser opponents beating the top teams. I think this year, just like we saw last year, we're not going to see a lot of the lesser teams beating the top teams, but we will see the top teams just really beat up on each other, and it's going to hurt the conference overall chances to have a team in the college football playoff. But it is also going to open up the opportunity for some of these teams to lose 2 games, and then we'll see those tiebreakers come into effect again. So that's where I do think, look, one of USC, Oregon, and Washington, and I left USC off here too, but USC is a very difficult schedule as well. We highlighted some of those games. They have to play Utah, Oregon, and Washington, so they don't get off easy at all. But either way, back to what I was saying, that look, one of these teams is going to lose multiple games. It's happened every time one of Washington, Oregon, or USC will probably just lose one game, but even then, their schedule is brutal enough they could easily lose two as well. So it's going to be really interesting to monitor. But I absolutely believe one team with 2 losses in Pac-12 play will be in the Pac-12 championship game and be back in Vegas. Now the question is, will that be Utah? And the other question is, will that just be one team, or will both teams have multiple losses, just like we talked about in 2018, where Utah had 3 and Washington had 2? Anything can happen in the Pac-12, especially when you have this much talent in the conference. It's going to be an incredible season. It'll be interesting to see how the Utes can make it out of it. And one of the things the Utes have going for them is they're going to get some exceptional linebacker play from Karene Reid. We're going to talk about what major award watch list he was just named to in 1 second. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our friends at Birddogs. Guys, Birddogs are great. Their stretchy khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Birddogs shorts do the exact same thing as a Lululemon, but they fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts and are made off a stiff, restricting cotton. And Birddogs fix the issues invented by Cloud Night fabric that just look like khaki but stretches so good you feel a similar way without having to sacrifice the movement. Birddogs use anti-stick sweating fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Guys, I'm wearing Birddogs right now as I record this podcast. I just got mine a few weeks ago from my friends at Birddogs, and they've become my favorite pair of shorts. They're really breathable, super comfortable as well. You can wear them on a date, going to the movies, recording a podcast per se. There's lots of different things you can do with your Birddogs. And they also make for a great gift as well if you're looking to give someone for a birthday or just something other event you might have coming up as well. So this is a great opportunity for you guys. You can go to Birddogs/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code LockedOnCollege. Once again, all caps, no spaces, LockedOnCollege for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege for free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise. So once again, head to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege and enter that promo code LockedOnCollege, all caps, to get in on a great offer from our friends at Birddogs. All right, we're in kind of the season now where it's time to preview the season, right? We're in June, July, and then August is right around the corner, even though it's less than 100 days away. I believe we got to be approaching 80 days to Utah football. Could even be at the time I'm recording this, I think out loud. But this is the time when you start to see award watch lists get named, and Karene Reid found himself on one of those. Reid is one of the 42 candidates that were named, and it included 16 linebackers for the Lot Impact Trophy Award watch list. This comes to us from the people at the Utah Athletics website, who for Utah football, that published this article that I'm quoting from and just listed kind of the information on the trophy. The Lott Trophy is named after NFL Hall of Famer Ronnie Lott and gives the defensive impact player of the year that makes the biggest impact on and off the field. We know Reid has been essential for this Utah defense for the past 2 seasons for his contributions, stepping up in different spots, especially back during some injuries in 21. And then obviously last season being the starter and the only starter, or not the only starter, but the only main contributor in the linebacker room to come back from that season, because Lander Barton was a rookie, of course, or just a freshman. Then you had Mahmoud Diabate transferring in after his years with the Florida Gators. So he was huge on the field from a leadership standpoint, helping everyone to line up, helped his brother Gabe Reid transfer in as well. It was a huge boost for this Utah pass rush. But he's also a guy who's been very involved in the community. And I think it's great that he's being highlighted and named to this award watch list, because he absolutely deserves it for the contributions he's made to the program overall as an individual and just in the community in general too, as I mentioned, helping out and doing different various things that he's been helped out with. And that's something that Utah football does a great job of. They are very involved in the community. I think that is one thing that's really cool about this program too. But I mentioned right there kind of some of the off the field stuff that he does. Let's talk about his impact on the field, because you talk about a guy who's in 24 games and 20 starts in 2 years with the Utes. He joined the program back in 21 as a walk-on, and remember, played that season as well in 21. It was Devin Lloyd, Nephi Sewell. When those guys dealt with some injuries, Reid stepped in a little bit, and he earned a scholarship after that season too. And then what did he do in 22? He earned all Pac-12 second team honors after leading the linebacker group with 72 tackles. He had 9.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Also added 3 pass breakups and an interception with a forced fumble and fumble recovery. Really strong in coverage for this Utah team over the middle field. I think that's something he was very underrated for. He had 4 or more tackles in 10 of Utah's 14 games last season, including his season high 10 stops, 1.5 tackles for loss at Arizona State. He recorded at least 1 sack in 3 straight games against UCLA, USC, and Washington State. Also forced a fumble against the Cougars with 5 tackles. That's one thing that Reid doesn't get a lot of credit for, in my opinion, that he deserves to, is his speed that he brings. That's one thing that Morgan Scalley gets so creative with his blitzes, right? He does a great job timing those, disguising and making it look like he's not coming. Also does a good job with his hands. If an offensive lineman can't step over in time, they'll try to reach out to be able to block him a little bit. He does a good job knocking those hands down, and he has the speed to be able to bring guys down. He had a huge sack on Caleb Williams, I remember, in the USC game. That was essential to the Utes' opportunity to be able to come back and beat the Trojans late in that game, back at the one that was at Rice-Eccles. And even looking back in 21, you could see the signs that he was going to be special, as he played in 10 games with 6 starts, posting 45 tackles. He had 2.5 tackles for loss and a sack, also contributing 3 pass breakups and an interception. His breakout game came against Washington State, where he recorded a career high 15 tackles with 1 sack. So once again, this is a guy who stepped in, huge expectations. Utah needs a linebacker in 2021 against the Cougars. And what does he do? Gets 15 tackles, still his career high, bursts onto the scene. And this was after joining the program in 2021 as that walk-on, as we mentioned. So absolutely earned his scholarship, earned the spot. And we talk about Karene Reid too. You're talking about a guy who does a really good job flowing to the ball. That was something I would get frustrated with Mahmoud Diabate at, is sometimes he would be a little slow to flow to the ball, or he would overreact and kind of run himself out of plays. Reid doesn't do that. He does a very good job getting around offensive linemen trying to climb to the second level and reach him to. Also a very strong tackler, does a good job wrapping up in space. There are times he misses a couple tackles too, but I thought overall he was the strongest tackler in this Utah linebacker unit last year, and just always found himself in the right place to make plays. We already highlighted his abilities as a blitzer too. I think he does a really good job of figuring out what an offense is trying to do, recognizing when they're trying to do a run fake or a pass fake. Does a good job getting coverage over the middle of the field. Mentioned some of those pass breakups. He's very quick, does a good job reading quarterbacks' eyes, and can close on balls quickly. And another thing that the stats don't show, and all those stats, once again, were courtesy of the Utah Athletics website. We appreciate the hardworking team they have up there that distributes those press releases with all those listed. But when you talk about Reid, you're talking about a guy who's a leader too. I mentioned recruiting his brother a little bit. Him and Gabe were both at Spencer Fano's house when he announced his commitment. I feel like they were in their cousins with Fano, so I believe they were part of that process too, communicating with him about what a great fit and place Utah is. And look, I think he was a huge voice in the locker room too. Once again, this is a guy who only played in one season and then was the only one on that linebacker core who had multiple years of playing experience. Even like guys like Justin Medlock and Lander Barton were looking to him, and even Mahmoud Diabate, when he was a little confused, I'm sure he was going over to Reid and talking it out with him and talking about things he needed to do better. And that's where Reid was able to step in and help and really lead this room. And it's something that made this Utah defense a lot better because of it, because of the impact that Reid made as a leader and just ability to shut guys down. So many big run stops on 4th and 3rd down. I mentioned some of the sacks too. Does a good job getting to the edge quickly, finding and locating the ball, can fill holes, and a strong tackler too. So I'm a huge fan of Karene Reid's game. I think it's awesome he's getting highlighted here, and I hope he has an outstanding season. I think him and Lander, as well as whatever Leavani Demooney and then Justin Medlock will factor into that too. I think Utah is going to have one of the best linebacking corps in the Pac-12 this year. Last year had its growing pains, right, with Reid in his second year still starting, some ups and downs, but I still thought overall mostly positive stuff. Lander in his first season, not just starting, but if college football, then you get Mahmoud Diabate in just his second season playing off-ball linebacker and learning an entire new defensive system. And look, Leavani Demooney will have to do that too, but he's a guy who's at least more familiar with Pac-12 play. He's faced some of these teams. He knows what they like to do, and he's more comfortable playing off the ball as well. So I'm excited to see what this Utah linebacker room can do. And I love that this award also, once again, recognizes on and off the field impact, because that is definitely something that Karene deserves recognition for. So once again, one of the 42 candidates, including 16 linebackers, named the Lott Trophy watch list, which is after Ronnie Lott, and give the Defensive Player Impact of the Year award. That'll be announced later in the season. I think that gets named in sometime in December, I want to say. So be interesting to watch the year that Karene has, and I think he's definitely going to have a chance, especially with some of that off the field impact stuff that he contributes with, to maybe be the winner of this. So that'll be something fun and interesting to monitor to see. So that's going to do it for our Utah football talk. But we do want to mention a little bit about Utah basketball, because one of the guys last week I had talked about, or I think 2 weeks ago actually, was Ray J. Dennis, who was the Toledo guard that Utah was very interested in, the MAC Player of the Year, led the conference in scoring and assists last season. I mean, he was unbelievable as a junior, 6'2", started his first 2 years at Boise State, then transferred over to Toledo and spent the last 2 years at Toledo, and in his senior season, he excelled. He's got the COVID year, so he's going to use that. He did end up transferring to Baylor, so Utah lost out on him. And it's a blow, because you're losing a guy who in MAC play averaged 19.5 points, 4.3 rebounds, 5.8 assists, and 48% shooting from the field. As I mentioned, he did go over to Baylor, which, look, the Baylor basketball program, they just won a national championship back in 2021. It makes a lot of sense why he would want to go join and be a part of that. But it is a bummer for this Utah basketball team, because this was a dynamic playmaking guard. I love the way he finished around the hoop, as a good shooter, can create create his own shot and create for others too. And just that athleticism in the backcourt. Getting Davion Smith was huge for Utah and getting more athletic in the backcourt, but it was still tough to lose a guy like Dennis, who I really think of between him, Raleigh Rooster, and Davion Smith. I think he would have been the best point guard on this roster had he come in. And now it'll be interesting to kind of see that battle. Will it be Davion Smith? Is Raleigh's familiarity with the system going to give him the edge? That's something that's going to be a fun battle to watch as camp approaches, but definitely a bummer to miss out on him because this is a guy who, look, Brandon Carlson probably would have still led the team in scoring next season, but Ray J would have had a chance to do it. Such a special player. I think he would have fit really well in this offense too, but as I mentioned, in the end, ends up going over to Baylor. So a little bit of a blow for the basketball team. And now still means they have a roster spot open. Will be interesting to see who they look for to fill it. There's still some talented names in the transfer portal. So I'd love to hear from you guys if there are any players out there that you'd like to add. I think where Utah will go with that spot is going to be a guard. I think that just makes the most sense because you want to continue to get explosive, have more guys who can handle the ball, especially when you lose Marco. You lose a guy who's so good at running Craig Smith's system, obviously knew how to get everyone else's, where everyone else was supposed to be, could play multiple positions, could handle the ball, right? And with Stefanovic leaving as well, right now, Raleigh Wooster, Davion Smith are probably the two guys I feel the most comfortable doing that. You got other guys like a Gabe Madison can bring it up, but I don't know what Gabe can't create for the other guys as much, right? He just provides that gravity and the spacing because he is such an exceptional knockdown shooter. So it's going to be interesting to see how it does all play out for the Utah basketball team, who recently actually just got back up to campus too. They've started their summer workouts. They've added some guys, Hunter Erickson, Lawson, Lovering, guys we've spoken about a little bit on this show overall. I am a fan of Erickson's game. Last season, I called a lot of Salt Lake Community College's games, and Salt Lake Community College is a top 5 JUCO basketball program. So he was playing against guys. He was playing with some of his teammates who were going to schools like Mississippi State, UAB, and other talented guards who are spread out all over the country, just guys who are going all these different places. So Erickson can absolutely play. It'll be interesting to see if he can crack the rotation, just because, look, this Utah basketball team has a lot of guys who can play, obviously, but the question is, can they play? Can the team play at a high level in the Pac-12 and start the season, or it didn't start the season outstanding, but still have a strong middle of the season, just have a more complete season. That's something this Utah team hasn't had yet. I think that's something I would love to see in Craig Smith's 3rd season. And once again, with Ray J. Dennis not coming, they're going to lose a little bit of potential explosiveness in the backcourt, but that's why you still got Davion Smith, so you have some of that and still some time to recruit another player. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Utah basketball is going to do. That is going to do it for our show today. Make sure you guys come back tomorrow. I've been teasing recruiting a little bit all week long, so we're definitely going to hit that. Also, we'll be doing a Q&A, so make sure you guys send in your questions. You guys can message them to me at JT Wistrcill. You can message them to our channel at Locked On Utes, tag them, or just leave them in the comments below, and we'll get to as many as we can on Friday's show. We've gotten to everyone's questions on every other Q&A so far, so I don't see why Fridays won't be any different. But once again, we'll be talking about some Utah recruiting on tomorrow's Locked On Utes. We'll see you then.